Welcome back to the Voices of Boyle. In this episode, I had a great chat with Maria Liddy, a family constellations facilitator, a trained debt doula, and the creator of the Lily and Max miscarriage care packages. Maria talks about her early days growing up in Boyle and her family's involvement in local tourism through a series of life-changing experiences that shaped the caring work that she does today. So in a nutshell, this episode is really a chat about community, resilience, loss, and finding your way when life takes an unexpected turn. If you enjoy real conversations about the ups and downs that shape us, you'll get a lot from this one. I hope you enjoy the episode, and if you do, please give it a share on social media. Thank you. Mia, you're very welcome to the Voices of Boyle. Thank you for coming along.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely.
And thank you for the goat's milk coffee.
It's one day I'll make $1 million out of that.
It was actually really nice. So it was. I never had goat's milk coffee before, but it was really nice. So Mia, tell us a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up to kick things off.
Sure. Well, I was born in Enniskerry, County Wicklow, and in 1977. And then when I was around 8, we moved to Boyle, to Lough Key Forest Park. My parents were restaurateurs, and the two of them were working so hard when we lived in Wicklow. Really, really worked hard. They had a beautiful restaurant in Dalkey, but it wasn't an easy life at all. I mean, I do remember waking up in the middle of the night and they weren't there. Like, they were working hard. Now, obviously, there was a babysitter there, but they were working till 2 or 3 in the morning, and then they'd have to get up again at 6 or 7. And it wasn't an easy life, really. They worked so hard for us as well, you know, always kind of putting our education first and stuff like that. So grateful to them for that. But they did decide that moving was a better option. So coming to Boyle was a whole new, it was only 2.5 hours drive away, but it felt like a different world to us from Wicklow.
Into the sticks.
Yeah, just a different community, different experience. And we were, I suppose, isolated in one way when we lived in Wicklow because we lived up the mountains. And I remember during the really bad snows in the early 80s, we would be snowed in. The snow would be right up to the windowsill in the house that we were in the Wicklow Mountains. And it was a lovely childhood, but moving to Lough Key made a completely different, different experience.
Yes, because I remember when, for anyone that doesn't know, your parents are Paula and Dermot Lahith, who were on episode 20 back in 2023. And I do remember your parents telling me that you came to Boyle in 1985. They had the restaurant up in Dalkey. Mid 80s, big recession came, and there wasn't that work-life balance which they were craving for.
Yeah.
And that kind of Lough Key kind of was an opportunity, and they jumped at it.
I think one of the things was that we would be literally living where we were working, and that they would have seasonal work, and it would be, you know, more opportunity for a family life, because they definitely saw that there wasn't a chance for family life when, you know, when they were working in Wicklow. And there was a huge kind of gut-wrenching moment where we had to pile everything into the car. And I do remember that feeling of being separated from what we knew. But coming into Boyle, there was something really welcoming about it. And I mean, imagine Lough Key Forest Park being your front garden. That was just the most amazing experience. And before we'd moved, we came here to the campsite for a couple of days. Just
reconnaissance.
That's exactly, yeah. And it was in the middle of the summer, and we were absolutely blown away by, you know, the gift shop and the boats and everything. So we just fell in love with the place. It was an easy sell.
Yeah, because there was a house that I remember at the back of the restaurant, and that's where you were.
Yeah, where the playground is now, that you have to, you know, pay the $5 to go into, whatever. Yeah. That was the footprint of our house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you were at that stage, you were probably 10, 11, 12?
Yeah, I was 8 when we came
8.
here. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, we arrived in April, and it was the week of my birthday. And yeah, so I was 8 and my brother was 10.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So back in those days as well, Mia, you would have the high season, which probably would have, it still would have been probably September to March, would it? Or that was the low season.
That's right. Yeah. So the 1st of April, or the first, usually around Easter, that was when it would start, and right up until the 1st of September.
Yeah.
And then the years that the ballooning championships were on, it would go on a little bit more, but the height of the season was June, July.
So then you had literally half of the year where there was no one in your backyard.
The whole
to the absolute opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we just loved when September would come and the place became so quiet. And I can't describe the lovely mornings, with the sunrise and the mist over the water. And we were so privileged to see that from the crack of dawn, literally. And at night time then, when we'd be coming home from school in the winter, you would see the lights would reflect on the eyes of the deer as they were grazing on the front lawn. And there'd be, a full herd of deer, 20 or 30 of them. And it was just magical that we were privileged enough to see that. It was such a privilege.
And of course, back then as well, Mia, Lough Key wasn't developed like it is today. So you hadn't, all the development that's there now. So you would have had it in a kind of more pristine, there was no quay built or, for the marine, for the boats and stuff like that. So you had just like unspoilt Lough Key back in those days.
It still looks quite similar. I know they've removed some of the trees and everything around the gazebo and that, but the footprint is still there. Where the toilets are now was the entrance to the old restaurant. And then there was a long corridor of glass all the way up to where the restaurant is now. So I actually had my 16th birthday party down in the common area in Lough Key. It was such a great venue for a birthday, and it was around Easter time, so there was a fancy dress, and we had Easter eggs were the prize. And it was just a lovely, my mother was wonderful for organising parties. Like, she loved a good party.
Yeah. Well, and as I said to your parents as well, Mia, they were instrumental in getting the balloons to Boyle in 89, I think it was 89. And without them and the kind of groundwork they laid back in those days, Lough Key wouldn't have the tourism that it has today. I really do think, and a lot of people always put down the Lifts as, being part of that community that really drove tourism to Lough Key back in the 80s, early 90s. Obviously, he left, I think it was 95. But, the groundwork was laid. The structure was there for then, as we see even up to now, what's going on. It's a massive credit to your parents and your family to do what you did in those days to keep the restaurant going. Because the other place across the other side of the lake was Doonshore. And while in my youthful days, Doonshore was where everyone went, kind of, and Lough Key was not as populated as it is now. Now it's the reverse. And that's because of that tourism infrastructure that your parents did. So I always do say that, like, it's so important what they did back in those days.
I mean, I think they really, immersed themselves in the whole culture of Boyle. They became involved in the town twinning, which, they went to France, and they were part of the Chamber of Commerce, and they made some really, really good friends, and they're friends to this day.
Yeah.
And I think they saw the potential of Lough Key. There was different opportunities. Some people were looking for a nighttime restaurant, but that wasn't really where the footfall was. It was during the day. They tried out different things. I mean, I was very young, but we were still washing dishes in the back kitchen while everybody was, on their holidays. The whole family were involved. We were working in the shop. We were waiting tables when we got a little bit older. It was an amazing experience, a wonderful place to grow up. And my parents were really good at getting that balance right between working hard. We saw them work hard, but they also, provided a good family life for us.
Yeah.
And we became quite independent, actually, as well. not only from learning how to run a restaurant or, be part of a good staff team, but we would kind of, when we were younger, would leave the house in the morning. We'd play around. We had 800 acres to play in. We knew that place like the back of our hands. And then we'd come back to we'd report for duty around lunchtime. And one of the things I know my mum was really adamant about was that we'd learn how to swim. Because then she felt, well, if they were off running around and they fell in, at least, they'd know what to do. So we did spend quite a lot of our time learning how to swim in Doonshore. There were a lot of lifeguards on duty at that time around the summer, and some of them offered swimming lessons. So we did our life-saving 1, 2 and 3 and everything up in Doonshore.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So that was for Mum's peace of mind, so that we could wander around, and if we did happen to slip in, we'd be grand.
And did you go to school in Boyle? Yeah.
So when I arrived, I was 8 and I entered into second class, Miss Hunt's class. And I remember Nicky Emmett was one of the first people I met in my class there. It was really interesting. Of course, my mother, she plaited my hair and then crossed it over my head like Heidi and sent me to school on the first day thinking I was gorgeous, but with the strange surname like Lahif and the hair, like they thought I was a foreigner, what German. And for a long time we were known as them Germans.
Oh, really?
But it was just that strange surname that we have. But I really did click in after a while. It was different. I hadn't been to an all-girls school, first of all. And while I was in a Catholic school when we were in Dublin or in Wicklow, it didn't have the same emphasis on, the choir and even preparing for religious ceremonies and stuff as we did when we were in Boyle. So there was a lot of new experiences for me. But I did enjoy learning how to play the recorder, learning how to sew, learning how to knit. I feel like in school, in School Creaston, we got a really good foundation for all the things, the creative stuff that I really enjoy now.
Yeah. Mm. And so I was going to ask, overall then you enjoyed school? I
loved school, but sure, I was a divil. Mum says when she go to the parent-teacher meetings, if she'd never met the teacher before, she knew exactly who they were because I had been taking them off at home.
Yeah.
And, mimicry was one of my gifts. And I'd say I was an average student. I got away with a lot. I sounded a lot more intelligent than I was. So I talked myself my way out of a lot of things, trouble or whatever. But I really did enjoy school, and I enjoyed the camaraderie, some really good friends, and I still am friends with, the core group today. And one of my really good friends, Sheila Egan, I'm actually the godmother to her child. She's Sheila McCarthy now, and her daughter is Martha Kate, and I am her godmother, and it's such an honour to be, to have that connection after all these years.
Of course, yeah. And Mia, I always like asking people's kind of memories of you were obviously 8 when you came to Boyle first, and then you guys left then in 95 as a family, right? So you had those 10 years where you were integrated in different communities and clubs and stuff in Boyle. If there's one lasting memory you have from your 10 years living full-time in Boyle, what would that be?
Well, it would have to be the school musicals. I was involved in every school musical. The very first one that we did was in the 90s, I think 1990. The Sound of Music, and it was fabulous. I actually was the housekeeper in it, so I had a few lines to say, and as the years went on in school, I ended up either being the funny comedian woman or the man. So a man, I played either of those because I was really tall, and it was just a great experience, actually. And I remember one year, one of the Marina Scally was on one of the main characters, and she had a really sore throat. So Frank O'Mahony rang me and said, will you come over, learn the lines and wait in the wings just in case she needs it. So I was in third year at the time, and third years weren't allowed into the musical. So that felt like such an honour that I got an opportunity to be involved with that. And Frank was great. He was a great teacher. Really enjoyed having that memory now of Frank and what he taught me, because I went on to do I did drama in Trinity. I didn't do it, but I went on for the interview, and he helped prepare me for that, which was amazing.
I've heard a lot of people say that over the years, that how much of an influence he had in various, maybe not even just from an acting or theatre point of view, but like, you know, giving some life advice as well.
That's right. And actually we nominated him on the Gay Byrne show for a Person of the Year award, and I got a phone call in the middle of the night, or quite late. I was in bed and Mum and Dad came in and they said, oh, Gay Byrne rang and wants to know, will you talk about Frank O'Mahony tomorrow? And I said, yeah, whatever. I did not believe them for a minute. And sure enough, they took ages to convince me. But yes, I was on the radio the next day with the Sister Richard and myself were talking about Frank, and it was just probably that might have been my first radio interview, but sure, there was no stopping me then. I've been on plenty since.
You got the bug.
That's it, exactly. Yeah, if there was an opportunity to talk, I'm there.
And did Mia participating in musicals back in those early days, did that influence you then in other ways later on in life?
Well, I always knew I wanted to work with people. That was definitely from a very early age. I had, as you know, Mum had polio as a child, which meant that she then, you know, she's in a wheelchair now, and her father was actually went blind when he was quite young, in his 50s. And so I was exposed to people who had special needs from a very early age, whether that was physical or even learning disabilities. I was really, really interested in working with people like that. And so I definitely wanted to do what I thought at the time. I said drama therapy. So that's what I pursued. But I ended up doing social studies in Sligo IT, which was a great basis for what I did next. So I'd say that the school prepared me for that. My experiences with the school musicals prepared me for that. And obviously the support of my parents, was fantastic. Yeah. But my experience in Boyle in general was a really well-rounded experience.
Yeah. And so then when you mentioned you went to college in Sligo, social studies, what was that experience like?
Well, you said we all left as a family. I did my Leaving Cert in 1994 and I went to college. And most people bring their posters and their teddies from, home. But I brought my whole family with me when they go to college. And I was just like, no, it's time for some independence now. So when they did move, we lived in the same house for 6 months or whatever. But I was mad to get out and be independent. So I moved into Sligo town because my parents had a house just outside of Sligo while they were building. And it was just time for me to go out there and taste the world of it. So it was great not to be too far away from the parents and at the same time have my independence in Sligo town. So moved to Sligo, loved social studies. It was so general. It suited me down to the ground. And I did 2 years there, and then I headed off to New Zealand for 3 months with my grandmother, who was 79 at the time.
To travel?
Yeah.
Okay.
My aunt moved out there, so she went to visit her, and I was chosen as the grandchild who's most likely to survive 3 months with my grandmother. And we really got on great, my grandmother and I. We spent the time in the same room, and the whole time I never saw her without her false teeth. Until on the return journey, she must have started to relax a little, and she brought me in breakfast in bed. This is the first time home after 3 months, and she was whistling through the gums. And then pointed it out to her. She covered her mouth and went, "Oh God." And she hadn't realised that because she was relaxed at home, I suppose, she forgot to put the teeth in. So she suffered for the 3 months in the same bedroom, never letting me see her without the teeth until she got home and relaxed a bit.
So that would have been an amazing trip and experience then, to be the other side of the world with your grandmother for 3 months. And like, was there any lasting memory from that trip, apart from obviously that when you came home?
Well, I mean, it was a great bonding experience for her and I. We got on really, really well, and we stayed with my aunt who was living over there. But I also got to work in a special needs school over there while I was it was a requirement for college to have some placement experience. And I had decided to take a year out from college to do this. But I thought, well, while I'm here, I'll have a placement anyway. And I worked in an immersion class. So there were Maori children who had special needs, and there was also mainstream kids. And what I loved was all the cultures were mixing together. We had when I was leaving, they had the haka, and we had a beautiful, I think they called it a hungy or a hui. And it was like a cookout with all sausages and burgers and things like that at barbecue, and everybody sang, and it was just lovely. And one of the teachers who was there had done a comparative study between the Maori culture and the Irish culture, and she saw a lot of connections in terms of, ceremonies and the more ancient cultures, like and how they married together. And there was quite a few Irish had married into the Maori community out there as well throughout the centuries,
Yeah.
So I felt really at home there. I loved New Zealand, absolutely loved it.
Yeah. And when you came back then after the 3 months, had you planned to go back to college?
I had. Came back. It was February, I think, when I came back, and everything was grey and everything felt so less colourful than having been away. And I just said to Mum, I don't think I can go back to college. I want to do something different with my life. So I rang my friend Sheila, who was training to be a teacher over in the UK, and she said, "Come over to me, just come." And 2 weeks later, I was on a plane over to the UK, and I literally walked into a job over there working with adults with special needs. And I loved it. I couldn't believe it. I was getting so well paid. I was, living with a group of Irish girls. I eventually found my own apartment then, and I just was making money. I was living life. I was absolutely loving it. So the opportunity in New Zealand that my grandmother gave me by bringing me kind of springboarded me into going to the UK and working over there. And really now I was an adult at this stage. I was like really living an adult life, making money and living it up in outer London. But I did feel homesick, and I thought, I'm 2 years here now. If I don't come home, I'm actually never going to come home.
Mm.
And there was a kind of sense of, okay, should I stay or should I go now? And I decided to come back. Yeah.
Was that hard, that decision? Because obviously you were having a great life, as you said. You had a community of friends over there. Life was good.
Mm-hmm.
Back in those days, though, Ireland would have been, I think, on par maybe with the UK as well, in terms of like lifestyle was good, pay was good, jobs were plentiful maybe in that industry. Mm-hmm. So did that play a part, or was it mainly because, as you said, you were homesick that you just said, no, I want to come back?
Yeah, I think my grandfather had died in, the January of the year I decided to come back. And I had just popped home for Christmas. My dad's dad, I'd gone to visit them. And I said, I'll see you now, Granddad, I'll be home again soon. And he said, you will. And 4 days later, he died. And it was like, when I got the phone call, I had just landed back in the UK, and it just felt very far away. And I kind of I came back home for the funeral, but like I missed the wake. And I just kind of thought, I don't want to be away for this. I need to come home. So, you had to give kind of so many months' notice and stuff. So it was the August before I decided to come home. And it was an opportunity to return to college as well.
Okay.
Because I had my training as in my certificate in social studies, but I hadn't gotten my degree yet. And I really wanted to, I knew that a degree was what I needed to kind of move forward in what I wanted to do.
So you went back to college?
I did.
And what did you study?
Well, I finished my degree in social studies.
Right.
And I worked straight from there into a job with young offenders, I think they called it at the time, the Youth Action Project. It was the Garda funded, but it was run by the North Connacht Services, Youth Services. And I absolutely loved working with these young lads who had misdemeanors, nothing major, a couple of a broken window here and maybe stealing a few apples there, nothing too serious. And there was maybe 15 or 20 of them on the books. And the way into their hearts was food. And I used to cook a big fry in the morning, and I'd have a line of lads out the front door waiting to get their sausages and rashers. And I absolutely loved working with the young lads. It was just my favourite thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how long did you do that? Did you work there?
I was there for 3 years. And we had done an amazing project. It was called Positive Animal Welfare in Sligo. So it was PAWS, PAWS. And it was around, there was a few incidences of animal cruelty. So we had asked the boys to highlight, being kind to animals. So we set up a whole project. It started off, we did drama work with them, we did art work with them, and then eventually we made a film. And we finished off with a premiere in the Clarion Hotel, and they had the red carpet, and we had hired tuxedos for them and big long stretched limos, and it was just an amazing experience for those lads who may never ever have had an opportunity to be treated like 5-star, and they were just wonderful guys. And I couldn't walk down the street without somebody greeting me, and it was so nice to just have what I felt was like my army of lads around me. And it was just time, I suppose it was time to go out on a high kind of thing. And so after that project, I decided to move to Maynooth to pursue my academic career.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a kind of a picture of, from what you've said so far, that you're a very caring person from the different areas you've gone into. That's what's kind of coming to the forefront. And obviously I've known you beforehand as well, so I know you're that kind of a person. So then you did mention to me that before we came on that you then studied criminology.
That's right.
So where did that come into the
Well,
picture?
I realised that working with the youth work was my thing. I really enjoyed it, and I was trying to kind of work out how could I further myself in this work. I had a long-term vision at the time that I'd love to set up some kind of a project where young people would be able to come and pursue their skills, something outside of the education, like forced mainstream schooling. And I didn't know quite how to do that, but I did know that if I had a further degree, something like a master's or a PhD, then I'd be taken more seriously. So an opportunity for criminology came up, and I decided, I'm going to go for that. And it was a master's in criminology.
Maybe just for listeners, including myself.
Yes.
Maybe just kind of give a little brief definition of what criminology is.
Okay, well, I have to say now it's been quite a while. It's nearly 20 years since I've studied it, and my life has actually changed so much since. But criminology is the study of crime. So it's not that exciting stuff that, like the Special Victims Unit or...
Oh, yes, CSI.
Yes, none of the CSI stuff. This was more of the sociology of crime, I suppose, and, why communities collapse and what can be done, I suppose, to tackle crime in the community. It was more the theory of crime. So it became it wasn't as interesting as it sounds. It's psychology, sociology, all those different.
What makes kind of potential criminals tick?
That's it, and why society breaks down and what can be done. And that was what I was really interested in. What can be done for the community, to prevent society breaking down. And because of my experience with the young people, and these were kids who were failed in the mainstream system. It didn't work for them. They were suspended usually by mid-October of every school year. And I brought them up to a polytunnel that we had in the community garden, and they loved planting spuds and growing tomatoes and getting a hammer and nails and making things. And I saw so much more in them than them as a failure in the system. And so I was really interested in looking at how we could approach it differently. So my thesis was on the youth justice system and the experience of families within that system. And I absolutely loved the research. I interviewed 31 families, and I got such a interesting, overview of what it was like to have a young person labelled as a antisocial behaviour or as an offender in their family. So I realised doing the research for my PhD that I was much better at the one-on-one, the peopling, than I was at the academics. So I decided that I would pursue trying to be more of a hands-on person than actually in the academia. Now, the bit I loved most was lecturing. I loved lecturing. That was my favourite part, and I worked with a lot of people returning to college. So some of the access projects, access courses, sociology and psychology. I worked, I trained a lot of people coming back into school. And, some of these people were in their 60s and they hadn't been in school since they were 12 or 13. And I was trying to teach them how to prepare them how to write an essay, for example. And I remember saying to one of them, right, lads, this is how you make an essay. You've got an introduction, you've got a main body, and you've got a conclusion. And some of them went, conclusion? You and your big words. And, I was like, she's right. I'm like, there I am kind of in this role as somebody who is, more superior than these people who have way more life experience than me. And I learned more from, there's a whole thing around working with young people and about meeting them where they're at and not trying to get them to be something that they're not, and not trying to be, more superior to them or whatever. And I really loved meeting young people at their level and working with them where they were at. So I decided to leave academia and to look for something that was more hands-on.
Okay, so Mia, after then stepping away from academia, like you said, what was next on the agenda?
Yeah, so it was, it wasn't such a clean break. Like, I've decided I'm not doing this anymore. I kind of had an interesting experience that my body was telling me it's time for a change. Living in Dublin was stressful. I was in a personal situation that was quite stressful, and I was just like, something needs to give here. And I had been going up and down on the train from Sligo to Dublin sometimes, and things weren't settled. And I went to the dentist one day. I'd left on the early train. I think it was like 20 to 6 in the morning from Boyle, and on the way to Dublin. I hadn't anything to eat or anything, and I was going to get my wisdom teeth removed. And I was sitting in the waiting room of the dentist hospital, and they gave me penicillin as a precursor to taking out my wisdom teeth. And within minutes, I started having a reaction. And I was like, I just watched an episode of Grey's Anatomy or something where anaphylactic reaction had actually taken place, and I couldn't believe that this was actually happening to me. And I really was like, this couldn't be. And I started scratching my skin, and then my tongue started swelling up. And I went to the reception and I was like, "Excuse me, I think I'm having a reaction." And she took one look at me and she just pressed the emergency button. And all hell broke loose. A gurney came along. She was like, consulting or calling the doctor. I was started to not being able to breathe really hard. I felt like there was an elephant on my chest. And I literally I was in anaphylactic shock. And I had what they call a near-death experience. I was just sliding down this slide. It was like the most euphoric experience one could imagine. It's like, woohoo, yes. And I was gone. I was loving wherever I was going, and I was quite happy to go there. And I remembered this, it was like a very thin veil between this life and the next. It just felt I was just within reach of this beautiful next step. There was if you can imagine the most incredible golf course you've ever seen in your life, just looking out onto this vista of beauty. And I was like, I want to go there. And it was like I was just about to reach there and somebody turned me around, kicked me up the backside and said, "No, now is not your time." And I just felt this really warm, like this love, so much love. Like I was like graduating toward the love, like a moth to a flame. And then at that moment, they'd administered adrenaline and I just came flying back from where I was. And I was like, and I was back in the room.
So you were after watching an episode of Grey's Anatomy where there was an anaphylactic shock scene or episode in it, and then you actually had one then as a result of the what they gave you, penicillin. So anaphylactic shock, I think, is when the immune system releases chemicals into the airways, which causes the constriction of the airways and also a rapid drop in blood pressure, I believe, which is very, very dangerous. Obviously, the low blood pressure combined with that. So that's what happened. So did you get the wisdom teeth out?
No. No, I didn't. I still have them. I actually still have them.
Right.
Yeah. And that was 2012. And I just ended up in hospital. I was on oxygen and it really was it was a wake-up call. Now, it didn't happen overnight. It took about 12 months for me to slowly pull my fingers away from the lifestyle that I was living at the time. I was in a relationship. It wasn't the happiest, most productive, wasn't making me the best version of me. And I wasn't loving doing the PhD and the academic stuff. And I just knew something had to give. So on the anniversary of that anaphylactic reaction, I actually took a step away from all that. I left the relationship I was in. I walked away. I left everything behind. I literally took one suitcase with me and I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I was leaving what I was in. And actually, it was the best thing I ever did. 6 weeks later, I met my now husband and my life has changed in the last 13 years for the better.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I've met Arlo. We had a funny story with the introduction with the names. Hi, I'm Carlo. Arlo, he said. I says, "No, Carlo." And he goes, "No, Arlo." It was so funny. I remember and we were both so confused. And not only that, the 3 or 4 people around us were looking at us going, "What is wrong with you?" Anyway, it was just, I remember that.
That's fantastic. When I was a teenager, Arlo was one of the coolest boys, in the school. And I have a beautiful friend called Sally Maidment, and Sally would have known.
I remember Sally.
Yeah. And when I was in Sally's house one day, and next thing, these 2 guys arrived on their motorbikes in their leathers. And, being in an all Catholic girls' school, I wasn't so versed in talking to boys. Maybe that's why I loved being at the musicals, because that was the only time we got to interact with the boys naturally. And next thing, this gorgeous guy walked in his full biker leathers, took off his helmet, and he had this long curly fringe, and it was like everything went into slow-mo. And I was like 16, he was probably 17. And I hid in the kitchen because he was just too much for me. I was like, wow, I don't belong here. And I just remember though thinking, wow, that guy's amazing. And then we didn't meet each other for 20 something years.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing.
Absolute crazy.
Yeah. And he went on and had his life and I had my life. And then
you reconvene.
yeah, when we did, we were both coming out of relationships and were out of them. And it was like when we met in the March of that year, it was like, I'm just out of mine. I'm just out of mine. And it was like two stars colliding and like a whole new world beginning. And it was the most incredible experience of what I'd always imagined being in a relationship was supposed to be. He just makes me the best version of me, and we're 13 years together now this March, and it's just actually beautiful.
Time flies.
Yeah, it's incredible. And within 3 weeks of being with that guy, I knew I wanted his babies.
Yes.
And, it wasn't long after that I actually heard what they call an inner locution. It was like I heard a voice in my body saying, Mum, are you ready for me yet? And I was like, no, I'm not ready for any babies. What are you talking about? I've only just met Arlo. And I just felt this. I've read since, about spirit babies and, that there is souls waiting to come into the family system. And I know now that was what that was, but I just wasn't ready at the time. But I remember talking to my cousin, my absolutely beautiful cousin. She's a few years older than me. And I was saying to her, oh, I'd love his babies, but I just, don't think it's time and it's all very new and everything. And she goes, what are you waiting for? She said, there's no good time to have babies. There never is. Just do it. Just, go for it. And she said, do you know that the Hopi Indians call their babies into existence through song? And I was like, no, I didn't know that. So I told Arlo about that, and we were in Westport, and Westport's a really special place for us. And the two of us kind of looked out at, the sun, the stars were out, and it was just a full moon, and we just called our baby into existence. And we said, if any baby wants to join our family, please do so now. And 4 weeks later, I was pregnant. And my son says, oh yeah, Mum, I remember that. I slid down a moonbeam into your tummy. I remember hearing you call me. Now he'll say now it's like, oh no, that's not true. I don't talk about that. But at the time, I really believed that he heard our call for someone to join our family, and he answered it.
Would that be a form of what they call? There is a term, I think, is it manifestation? Is that something like that you're kind of manifesting this into existence? Is that kind of on the same, or is it a different realm altogether?
I'm not sure. I think manifesting is, yeah, I suppose in a way. I don't actually know the answer to that.
Yeah, no, it's because I hear that term being used a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, is that kind of something similar? Like,
yeah, I wonder. It just feels like our son Ruan, who likes to be called Roo for short, was always meant to be part of our family, and he was just waiting to be called.
Okay.
Whereas I think if the manifesting is like, you put it out there to the universe and the universe answers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose that's what we did too.
So before we get on to, I want to talk about your business aspect of it as well, because I'm very interested, because I know zero about it.
Mm-hmm.
You also trained as a death doula.
Yeah. So, all this stuff was happening, this, interesting new life. And my PhD was definitely very far into the deep freeze. I had this beautiful baby who, just fulfilled everything that I'd ever wanted, like to be a mum. And I had this incredible husband who was really supportive, such a great dad and husband. And then I knew I needed to find work. Money needed to come in. So there was a kind of a few steps leading up to the training as a death doula. I was really wanted to be present for my son, but I also wanted to bring money in in a way that I wasn't 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And I like bucking the trend in that way. So I was helping my brother with his business. And while I loved that, I was working with young people from other countries coming in. I was supporting them in their schools and in their host families. It just wasn't as fulfilling. I knew it wasn't quite for me. And then lockdown came. And I was like, okay, I need to retrain for something. And I'd had an experience of something called family constellations. And through both family constellations and led me, I suppose, to training as a death doula. Now, family constellations would be my priority. And then the death doulaing is like a complementary aspect of the family constellations.
So for anyone that doesn't know what a death doula is, maybe give a little explanation.
So, well, at the moment, what I offer is mostly celebration of life, a celebrant. So I go to the family after the person has died and we talk about them and get stories about them and, put together a nice little kind of synopsis of their life, and then we do a celebration of life, especially for people who aren't too keen on maybe doing the mainstream funeral. And there's always some nice ceremonies around that. For example, we have I often ask people to take some wildflower seeds that I have and we sprinkle them into a pot, and then every year those seeds come flower, and so the person is remembered every time the seeds flower. So for me at the moment, the aspect of death douling is the celebrant part.
So you wouldn't have actually been with the person themselves. Have you done that?
No. So while I am trained to do that, I haven't actually had the opportunity yet to attend to somebody, in their final hours. I have supported people who are preparing to die, just by asking them the questions that people are afraid to ask. What they want, what are their wishes and desires for after they're gone. Now it depends on who employs me. If it's the client, if it's the children, then of the person who is dying, then it's their wants and needs. And if it's the person themselves who wants me to be their advocate, then I can do that as well.
Okay, so you've been in that position where someone is not obviously maybe at the final stages, but that they're getting there. And
yeah.
So I suppose again, it takes a very special person, and I've said this already about being a caring person, and that's the kind of picture I'm getting, is that not everyone could do something like that, or even have the want or the interest to do it, because you have certain, I won't say death industries, but people are like coroners, undertakers. They have to have basically kind of not a no emotion, but there's a almost like a mental block. And then you have death doula, and like what you mentioned there, where you have to have the exact opposite. You have to be emotionally involved, almost like is the word I'm looking for, an empath, where you can kind of feed off their energy and kind of put it in a positive light, like you're doing. Like, it takes a very special person, I think, to be involved in that industry.
Well, I do feel honoured that being, like I mentioned, being the eldest daughter of somebody who, was in a wheelchair, has actually given me an opportunity to understand, to look past the illness or the disability and to see the person. So that was actually a privilege for me to be able to grow up with normalizing disability or illness or blindness or, things like that. So it's more that the life experience of, not being afraid of these different aspects of life, that has brought me to being in this position as opposed to anything else.
Yeah.
And
I suppose another kind of, what's, like, you always hear people when it comes to their final days or comes to the end of their natural life, they have regrets. Is there any kind of regrets that kind of pop out consistently? Like, no one ever says, as we know, I wish I worked harder, or I wish I worked longer. No one ever says that.
Yeah.
It's more of a, I wish I spent more time with my family. I wish I traveled. I wish I, it's never the things that everyone is trying to bust their ass every day to do. So does that come up?
Yeah, well, so in my work as a family constellator, often I'm able to tease out where somebody is at. And, the long-term goal is to accept things just as they are, exactly as they are. And that takes a little bit of work. And so through the family constellations, I'm able to get, that approach gets the person to the point where they would hope that they'd be at peace with where they were at. And oftentimes as someone moves in towards the end of life, they do come to a point of acceptance. There's all those stages of grief where they're in denial and they don't, they fight against it, and they're not willing or prepared to go there. And, there's all those stages, and they're all natural. And then oftentimes we find, especially for the person who's dying, that they're ready. People around them mightn't be ready for them to die, but somebody with a terminal illness is often ready when the time comes.
Interesting.
Yeah. And move into acceptance, and then there's no regrets because you're in that liminal space between this life and the next.
Yeah. And obviously as a result of training in that industry, or for being a death doula, it obviously it could put a kind of a microscope on your own mortality. Do you ever think, does that bring up those thoughts?
Yes, definitely. Like I would like to explore a little bit more about conscious dying. So, where I'm not fighting against it, but embracing it as it approaches. And, when you were talking about manifesting earlier, I am looking at now at this. I mean, I promised my son I plan to live at least to 98, so I have another 50 years to go. But to rather to be than being afraid of death, because oftentimes our fears are exactly what we do manifest. But when the time comes and when I'm ready, to welcome it, but to be prepared in a way that I would love my death to be a celebration of my life. And I know I've often said I'd love the people who attend my death to wear colourful clothes, and for there to be drumming and, like bonfire, and just joy at the fact that the whole purpose of my life here is to move on to the next, is to transcend to the next level, whatever that might be, however you might see that, whether it's moving into heaven or, reincarnating and trying again or whatever, that this whole life's journey was to attempt to be the best version of me that I possibly could, so that I could then transcend to the next level. And so that's why, of course, people are sad when people die. But if the life has been lived and it's been a long and meaningful and loving life, then for me anyway, I'm hoping that will be the end result, that it'll be a celebration, and that there'll be joy for me because I'm going where I was meant to go in the first place.
Yeah, it makes sense. For me, I remember when I was growing up, I used to always hear people talk, about the religions and stuff like this, and that's its own separate topic. But I always used to think everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die to get there. So I used to always kind of be weird, but then obviously it wasn't, I think, what happens after you die. It was how you die.
Yeah.
That really is the uncertainty, the fear of uncertainty. And that's, I think, what most people are afraid of. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how does that final day come for us? Is it in pain? Is it so? So I think, and that's the big question, of course. So trying to prepare for those very deep stuff, obviously, but to just finish off on this part of it. But it's how you prepare mentally, I think, as you said, makes a big difference, to realize that the day is coming for us all. It's as certain as any, And I think if we can be more at peace and comfort internally, it makes a big difference.
I'm seeing more and more, on now, probably because my algorithms are towards that kind of thing, but I am seeing how people are more willing to discuss death. I mean, death is a part of life, and that's such a cliche. But just as our bodies are made to give birth, our bodies are also made to die. And, given if it's a natural death, I mean, there's obviously different when it's a sudden death and it's unexpected. And, that comes with all its other social, aspects and pressures and emotional and grief that, can be dealt with. Everything can be dealt with. But in a natural death situation, our bodies they know what they have to do. And it's about, I suppose, educating ourselves around what happens as we enter into that phase of dying, to remove the fear from that, because our body will know what to do when the time is right. And if we're educated in it, and if people around us are educated in it, then it can be something, a beautiful transition into the next step, wherever that is, and whatever. And there's room for it all. There's room for all the beliefs, whatever, whether it's religion or none. There is an opportunity for everybody to experience death in a beautiful, peaceful, celebratory way.
Well put. That's more succinct than I could put it. So let's get on then to your business, which is, I believe, a family constellations facilitator.
That's right.
Explain all that, because I know zero about this.
No problem. Yeah, so the family constellations experience for me was personal, in that I had gone to Wicklow for the 5 days, and I had a profound healing experience, in that, the pressures and the stresses and the emotional upheavals that I was feeling in my life actually didn't belong to me. And that sounds so unusual, but as I explored it more, I discovered that we often take on traumas unconsciously, as an unconscious loyalty to the people who've gone before us in our family system, to play out traumas that are either brushed under the carpet, that are so big that they haven't been talked about ever again. And patterns will continue to repeat themselves in our family systems until they have been looked at, named, honoured, and put back where they belong. So when I had come back from my 5 days in Wicklow, I was so blown away by what this had done for my lens through which I looked at the world, that when I got an email in to say that there was training happening in the UK, I didn't even hesitate. I said, yeah, that is what I want to do. Absolutely. My whole body saw the email and went, yep, I'm doing it. And I didn't know where we were going to get the money. I didn't know how I was going to give 5 days every month to go to the UK to train. And then lockdown came. And what happened with that was we didn't have to travel. So I did a lot of it online. Now, when the borders opened up or whatever, I did travel, and we did go, and we often spent 10 days in a row over there to make the most of being able to be together. And at the same time, in a way, the universe answered how am I going to afford the travel? Because the travel was going to cost nearly as much as the training. And hey presto, thank you, COVID. So I trained from 2020 to 2022, and then I started. I mean, they say, just do it, just start. So I started doing workshops 1 or 2 a year. And now last year I offered 1 a month. And now this year I've decided to collaborate with other practitioners. So ultimately, Bert Hillinger is the founder of Family Constellations in the 1960s. He was a Catholic priest, and then he went over to work with the Zulu people, and he discovered how they put their ancestors in order, in that those who came before us were important. And oftentimes when somebody who've come before us has been ostracised, left out, ignored, maybe, for example, in Ireland, a lot of babies were given away in the 1950s, taken away, stolen, if you want to say. And a lot of people discovered that they had an older sibling that their mother had given birth prior to their marrying their father. And they had their whole lives thought that they were the eldest, only to discover that there was a child older than them in their system. And then they went, oh, I always felt out of place. I always felt that there was somebody else. I always felt there was something missing. So oftentimes family constellations can help reorder what's been put out of order. And when those orders are renewed or restored, then things can fall into place and people are able to step into their life fully. And they can hand back those hidden or unconscious loyalties that we agree to take on. We don't realise that we take them on for our grandparents or great-grandparents, but what we're doing is repeating the pattern often until that pattern is named and recognised. And then through a series of what we call healing sentences in the business, we can actually make the connection between that unconscious loyalty and us. And by making the connection, we can break that pattern and then it frees us up to live our life fully.
Okay, so interesting. I've never, as I said, I know nothing of it. So if I was to kind of in my own head break it down as that there are issues that can be passed down from prior generations to an individual. You try then through as a family constellations facilitator, you try and get to maybe the root cause of those issues to try and find an overall balance or a new kind of aura or something like that. Would that be?
So when a traumatic event happens, and it can be, abandonment, it can be war, it can be famine, and we in Ireland, Irish history, we have generations recovering still from the famine. Our population still hasn't recovered from that time where people died and were dispersed. And the traumas that would have passed down, we think, oh, that's 150, that's 200 years ago, whatever. Why are we still affected by it? But actually, my great-great-grandfather, was directly affected by the famine, which meant that my grandfather had experiences that would affect him, which meant my mother was affected by the way she was parented, which directly relates to me. And, so we inherit things from our parents, our nose is the colour of our eyes, how tall we are, but we also inherit, patterns of behaviour. And we do that sometimes to honour those who've gone before us. And there is a way of honouring those in a healthy way, and there's a way of honouring in an unhealthy way. And oftentimes we can, if we feel there's a block to our life, how am I not making enough money? Why can't I succeed in my business? Why can't I find love? Often if you when I interview my clients, I find that maybe their grandmother was actually in love with somebody else before they met their grandfather. And through some traumatic experience, they could not pursue the first love that they had. So they married the grandfather, and then they had a child, and that child had a child. And now this grandchild is suffering because their grandmother was actually in love with somebody else before they came along. And they take on that unconsciously make an agreement, a soul agreement to, honour the grandmother by also suffering in their love life. But if through constellation work, we can use those healing sentences and make room for the first love that grandmother had and honour them, include them in the family system, and then things settle and people can kind of take a breath, and you'll feel actually even an expanse in your heart and your chest when the right sentences are said. And then things can relax, and maybe that grandchild, once they've made the connection with why they're carrying something that doesn't belong to them, where it belongs, they can place it back, hand it back to their ancestors, and then they can step into their life in a more successful way. So family constellations assists people to make that connection between those traumatic events that happened in their family's past, between the unconscious loyalties that they make with their family, and then with their life experiences and the blocks that they have to living a successful life.
Mm.
And when I say successful, I don't mean like financially successful necessarily. I mean that experience of being the best version of yourself that you can possibly be.
Yeah.
And through the family constellation work, and it's deep dive into, layers and layers of subconscious patterns of behavior that we experience. And, it's literally one step at a time. You might be doing family constellations for the rest of your life. But any kind of work around family constellation work will help to, like a domino effect, to put things back in order in both, they say, for 7 generations behind and for 7 generations coming. So you're working not only for you, you're working for your ancestors and you're working for your descendants. So there's a kind of a lovely systemic healing that happens right across the generations, going back and forward through family constellations.
Makes sense. That's well explained. It to me, in my head, I look at it like most of us would have like a virtual genetic muscle memory, if that makes sense. That's kind of expressing itself in these different areas. But obviously, you've explained. That's how I see it in my head, that we can have no fault of our own. It's just passed down through these kind of virtual genetic muscle memory fibers, if you like.
Yeah.
So that's how. Yeah. So there's also another arm of your business, though. I think it's the Lily and Max Care.
That's right.
What is that?
So, as I mentioned, it's really important to name those who belong in the family. And that includes babies who are missing, and babies, who've been given away or who have died early, and also babies who have been lost through miscarriage. So I myself have actually had 2 miscarriages, one in 2020 and one in 2022. And because of the work that I do, I knew that it was really important to include these babies as part of my system. Yes, I have 1 living child, but I've actually had 3 pregnancies. And so it's really important for me to include those children in my family system. Because if I don't, then my grandchildren might suffer somehow. I don't know how, but they might also lose babies if I don't include my babies who are lost. So, and I've lost babies because there are babies that have been lost in my history that haven't been named, or that have been forgotten, or whatever. So through the family constellations, I knew that it was important to include them. So we named them. My husband named the first baby Lily, and my son named the second baby Max. And after the second miscarriage, I was sitting in bed in recovering, and I said, something good must come from this. How I feel right now, what's happening in my life. I really want people to benefit from this experience. So I kind of asked the babies if they could guide me to what's needed. And I said, well, what do I need now? I took a pen and paper and I wrote a list of what I need. I love a bath. I'd love a cup of tea. I want to do something for, my baby who has just passed. So I wrote down a list of all the possible things I could put into a box and tangibly hand to somebody who's had a miscarriage. It's particularly hard for the dads, because my husband really wanted to do something for me. And the best thing I could do was send him to Dunn's and tell him to get me 5 pairs of granny knickers. And so he was actually doing something tangible, something useful. He was making me endless cups of tea, but also he wasn't sure how to help. And I thought, this is something that I can actually put together in a box for the family and friends of people who've experienced miscarriage. So I wrote down, I put a candle. Let's put some bath salts in. Let's put some tea and a biodegradable urn with a little, a tiny little liner inside that we could put a symbol of the baby. And for me then, I developed that a little bit more, locally sourced, biodegradable. It was all really important to me that everything in the box would be able to be returned to the earth. And so I contacted about 20 different suppliers in the area who were all making locally sourced items, beeswax candles, tea from the Irish Tea Company based in Coote Hall. Then there's bee bombs in there, which are like seed bombs that once also like a ceremony in it. I've included a ceremony so that people will know what to do and the words to use, so that when they do put the biodegradable urn in the earth, they'll be able to sprinkle it with the bee bombs, and the seeds are perennial, so they'll come up every year, so that there's a reminder that life does continue even after loss. So in a way, the family constellations and the death doulaing came together and they created the Lily and Max miscarriage care packages, for me.
Again, as I said, there's this recurring theme of very caring, nurturing, and I think it's lovely. And I think the Lily and Max care package is also probably a form of maybe closure for some that need it, in especially this day and age as well. I think there's it's a really nice idea, and it's something that is very important.
Well, I was given the honour of getting an enterprise grant actually in the last couple of months. So for the next year, I have an opportunity to actually get the Lily and Max boxes out there. And ultimately, my long-term goal I would love to have a natural burial ground in the area, or an eco-friendly burial ground. I'm not sure how you'd call it, but natural burial is important for me as well. And I see the Lily and Max boxes as my first step towards realising that goal of a natural burial ground, because inside is the natural biodegradable urn, so that can break down and be returned to the earth. And, this renewal of life is important as well, that the cycle of life continues. And so let's see, watch this space, and hopefully it will be a source of peace for people, and something that their friends and family can tangibly give them and feel like they're doing something. And not just kind of feeling helpless in it, but feeling like there's hope and a ceremony with it as well.
Well, I'll put in all the links to these various things, but before we finish up, I want to go into the last section, but before we finish up, where can people get in touch with you?
So I'm still building my website, and but at the moment it's Maria Liddy Family Constellations @gmail.com.
Perfect.
Yeah, and hopefully from there, on Instagram as well, the Lily and Max care packages, Lily and Max miscarriage care, and on Facebook, Maria Lahif Liddy.
Yeah, I'll put all them links in anyway when the blog post goes up. So just to go into the last section, I just want to kind of bring it a full circle around to a bit of Boyle, just to finish it off, to keep everyone happy.
Yeah.
So I always ask, what has been your one COVID memory that stands out for you?
Well, during COVID, my husband, who I call a Swiss Army knife of a human because he has so many tools and abilities, he built a mobile sauna.
That's right. I've seen it. I was in it.
It was something that he really missed, was going to the sauna in Kilronan Castle. And he said, well, I'm just going to build myself one. And outside, he was like a cartoon outside, because all I could hear was woo, bang, bang, bang. And after 14 hours, this incredible box appeared that he made from polycarbonate and a wood's burning stove on a boat trailer he created. And we actually drove that sauna to Doonshore and had the most incredible life during lockdown, where we were outside having a sauna, jumped into the water, living, a healthy life with a group of very good friends who were of the same mindset as us, that, we didn't have to be restricted and live in an enclosed space. We could be healthy, even though, it was a tricky time.
Of course, yeah. And as you see now, mobile saunas are getting to be really popular.
Have absolutely taken off. It's amazing. But we have the best life because we have our sauna outside, we've got our plunge pool, and we can bring it anywhere we want.
Isn't that just fantastic? It really
Fabulous.
is.
Yeah.
And favourite thing about Boyle, whether it's something in the past or current?
Well, I absolutely love the camaraderie, I suppose, but it's the way people are willing to help. You know, if the car breaks down, within seconds, somebody's there to help. This morning, I forgot my wallet. I needed diesel, and a very kind person offered. I had sterling in the car. They offered to take on the sterling because they lived up the north, and they exchanged it for euro for me. And that doesn't happen in bigger cities and bigger towns. It was just this sense of security and trust. And I just love that about Boyle. And when I left when I was 18, I didn't think I'd be back. But when I met my husband and I came back, and I'm just like so glad to see that consistency and that security, and knowing that my son is going to places and getting to experience that sense of community that I had growing up. It's really lovely.
And we obviously had the balloons last September. So a then versus now for you is obviously because you lived actually out in Lough Key back in 1989, 1985 until 1995. What was that like? Did you go out last September too?
Yes, I did.
What was that like? What was that experience, that nostalgia?
It brought back so many memories. There was a book out in the 90s called The Chronicles or something. It was a huge big book, and it was all of the kind of highlights of the centuries before. And they actually had a balloon in the shape of a book. And I remember one morning getting ready for school, and I heard this outrageous noise outside. And it was the burners. And I just looked out the window of my bedroom, and there was a huge giant book floating by. And it's like the stuff of, I don't know, Alice in Wonderland, that, you know, those kind of stories that just, the imagination goes wild. And I had such an incredible experience of growing up in Lough Key Forest Park, and the fact that, you know, my parents were so actively involved in the ballooning, and we had people were phoning in saying where their balloons had landed, because there were no mobile phones, or if there were, they were very few and far between. So in a way it was a lot more exciting, because people would ring the restaurant and say, we've landed in such a farmland on such and such a place, and, you know, tell our team to come and get us. So that brought back so many memories of that time. And this time round, we actually chased one of the balloons all the way to Highwood on an absolutely incredible morning. And just looking around where we live, with the mountains and the lakes and the friendly people, we live in such a gorgeous area that's steeped in ancient history. And I do feel really, really lucky to have been brought to Boyle and to still be living here.
Well, I think that's a perfect time to finish up. And I thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I've learned a lot. As I said, I think you're a very caring, nurturing person. I think that comes across to anyone that listens to this.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best in your businesses. And I'm going to have another goat's milk coffee soon.
Thank you so much, Carlo. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.